All people have the right to an education. Compared to some countries and how our own education system used to be, we are very fortunate today to give everyone an access to an education. However, even though we have this basic human right, many people are still upset with how our education system is today.
According to the National School Board, education has many purposes as listed here. The most important of these is the granting of equal opportunity to all students and to prepare students to be self-reliant in the real world.
However, in our education system today, these goals aren't always met, thus bringing us to our topic, what are the issues with public education in America? My name is Jenna Hayes.
I'm Tiernan McGrath.
I'm Ciara Hellmann.
And I'm Chloe Manderson. We explored this topic by researching and solving problems related to the way students learn scientifically, the way teachers and students approach their education ethically, how the government can support education through legislature, and how to provide equal opportunity economically to all students.
We must first try to understand how students learn and why they learn this way. But we must also try to understand why our current methods in the classroom aren't working. Currently, our public schools are heavily standardized. This means that the skills and knowledge students are expected to learn is strictly defined. This also means that teachers have to follow teaching plans that go over certain objectives and criteria. Many times, teachers often end up going off plans that they didn't even create themselves, and this just sucks the creativity out of the lesson and disengages the students. With this method, students end up just memorizing facts for a test and then forgetting the information once they're done. But standardization is a huge problem because it disengages the students so they have no interest in what is being taught. And I will continue to explain why students must be interested in order for them to learn. This image shows how the adolescent brain develops. The blue represents mature brain tissue. So as you can see, the brain isn't fully developed until the age of 20 or 25. But more specifically in the brain, the frontal lobe isn't done developing. Now this part of the brain controls reasoning, problem solving, short-term memory, and planning and executing behavior. And this is the last part of the brain to mature. So while the frontal lobe is developing, the parietal and the temporal lobes control making decisions. Now these parts of the brain deal with sensory information and emotion. This is why teenagers often base their decisions off of their feelings more than anything. And because of this, students learn best when they have an emotional connection to the information. Learning through concrete experiences is the best way to stir this emotional response. So concrete experiences is when a student is directly involved in the learning process and the lesson appeals to all of the senses. For example, when students go on field trips, or they go to museums, or they do to labs, they are seeing, touching, hearing, and feeling the information. And this spurs an emotional response that connects them to the material. So to apply this to the classroom setting, I believe that classes shouldn't have more than 15 students and should be in a seminar format with less standardization. This way, students will be able to pursue what actually interests them by studying and analyzing it with their peers, and with less standardization, teachers can teach how they would like, which will keep the students engaged, as Jenna will continue to explain later.
So I explored the ethical issues with public education, and more specifically, how do students and teachers approach their education in public schools today? The University of Technology Sydney found that there are 3 ways that students approach their education. In the first, they strive to deeply understand the material that they're learning. They might not obtain the highest grades in the classroom because the assignments and tests don't fit their analytical approach, but they create their own ideas and they connect the material with other experiences or things they've learned in the past. The second approach is a very prominent one in high schools today. These students just want to learn the bare essentials to reproduce the knowledge to finish the assignment or test. They don't care about their learning, and they don't usually get good grades, which leads them to have more negative emotions about learning. In the third achieving approach, the students are organized in their time and materials and are good at finding what the teacher wants from them, but they don't necessarily care about the application of the knowledge that they're learning. The article stated that the understanding of a deep approach applied with the organization of an achieving approach will lead students to success later on in life. So we must look at how teachers can help students adopt these approaches. Dr. Asha from the Education and Medicine Journal stated that lots of stress from school assignments can push students to adopt the surface approach. So instead of piling on busy work assignments, teachers should implement more interactive and comprehensive assignments that engage the students and push them to deeply analyze the material that they're learning. To decide how the government can best help students adopt these approaches, we must look at the current politics surrounding education.
No Child Left Behind Act, or NCLB, was set in place in 2002 by President George W. Bush. The goal of NCLB was to improve classrooms nationwide and to bring every school to the same standard. Legislators were going to improve the American education through yearly standardized tests, strict reprimands, and government intervention in failing schools. However, government intervention did not work in low-achieving schools, and test-oriented learning failed students. In the last decade or so, educators and administrators have realized that NCLB was a mistake. It impersonalized and standardized learning, which, as Ciara talked about, is ineffective in the long term. In 2015, Every Student Succeeds Act, or ESSA, was replaced NCLB. Although students continue to take standardized tests that allow states to make their own tests or have students take nationally recognized ones like the SAT or the ACT, and this has helped in stopping test-centric learning. However, there are also flaws within ESSA. Whereas NCLB required teachers to be highly qualified, meaning they needed a bachelor's degree or higher to teach, ESSA allows states to hire teachers that are not highly qualified. Even though it has been shown to undermine effective learning, ESSA only requires 2 years of higher education. Time and time again, it has been shown that better and more educated teachers lead to better results in students. Educators are especially concerned that students in richer districts would receive more highly qualified teachers than already disadvantaged students in poor districts. Teachers with more education tend to gravitate towards more prestigious and better paying jobs in the richer districts, whereas minimally educated teachers tend to gravitate towards jobs with less rigid qualifications. Miriam Hodge, a professor at the University of California, says, "States set small, quickly achievable goals that are not lofty enough to bring low-performing students up to the standards set in other states, so their starting line will perpetually stay behind. The lowering of teacher qualifications in order to fill classrooms is one example of these quickly achievable goals. Another example is how ESSA does not require teachers to have a degree in the subject they teach, and they do this in order to fill classrooms. Having expert teachers leads to better student outcomes, and allowing educators to teach when they're not experts will only inhibit a student's ability to learn and understand. Our government needs to be able to balance good legislation and good education, and unfortunately, we are most limited by money."
I looked at the economic shortcomings of American education. More specifically, I researched why all students don't have equal opportunity or access to resources and how to ensure that they do. One of the largest shortcomings in American public schools is the proportions by which they are funded. Around 50% of a school's funding comes from the federal government, and the other 50% comes from the local property and income taxes. And though this sounds pretty fair, the 50% coming from the government is often used to fund equity and nutritional programs, which, while helpful in some communities, are not necessarily vital to a good education. The other 50% that is dependent on the local community, the incomes and properties of that local community more specifically, is used to fund and pay for teachers, counselors, and necessary educational programs. This means the system generates large funding differences between wealthy and impoverished communities, because while a high-income community is able to pay for the best educators and the most resources, a low-income district struggles to recruit qualified teachers and is lacking in those educational resources. This funding inequality has profound implications when it comes to students, because according to research on student success, school resources are systematically related to student achievement, meaning the better the resources, the greater success a student has. To show this, when comparing graduation rates of low-income students and those of non-low-income students, The Atlantic found that in every state that reported graduation statistics, low-income students graduated at a lower rate than their non-low-income peers. In fact, in states such as Minnesota and Alabama, the graduation rates differed by almost 40%.
To solve the scientific, ethical, political, and economic problems of American education, we must provide more government grants and make highly qualified teachers more available, as well as incentivizing the teaching profession.
There should also be less students in each class so that there are more opportunities for teachers to spend time creating engaging lessons where students are learning through concrete experiences.
Assignments should not limit students, which will allow them to develop a deep approach and have more positive emotions about learning.
And our last solution, the one that might seem the most obvious, is to allocate more government funds to our education system. Quite a revolutionary idea, I know. But this could help make student opportunity more equal and allow the funding of new educational programs that facilitate our previous solutions, like furthering teacher training. However, this solution also brings us into our limitations because there's always going to be the question of where else in the government these funds can be cut in order to better serve our education.
Another limitation is the lack of the desire for the teaching profession. Teaching positions are underpaid and underappreciated, which often leads to high burnout rates in teachers.
And we also understand that it would be difficult for teachers to go through additional training programs once they have also already finished their college educations.
The last limitation is the actual willingness that the students will have towards their education, because this will only work if the students are motivated to learn. Thank you.
Thank you.